Subscribe. Foreign Exchange Management Act, 1999, FEMA. FEMA is the primary legislation governing FPI in India. It replaced the Foreign Exchange Regulation Act, FERA, 1973, which was considered archaic and restrictive. FEMA provides a legal framework for foreign exchange transactions, capital account transactions, and external commercial borrowing. FEMA has been amended several times to liberalize FPI regulations in India. Under FEMA, FPIs are classified into two categories: foreign portfolio investors, FPIs, and non-resident Indians, NRIs. FPIs are further classified into three subcategories. Category I, FPIs are government agencies, central banks, and sovereign wealth funds. Category II, FPIs are all other entities not covered under Category I or Category III. Category III, FPIs are those who take positions in the derivatives segment only. FEMA allows FPIs to invest in Indian securities such as equities, bonds, debentures, and mutual funds. FPIs can also invest in Indian companies through the primary and secondary markets. However, FPIs are not allowed to invest in Indian companies engaged in the agricultural sector or plantation activities. FEMA also provides guidelines for the repatriation of funds by FPIs. FPIs can freely repatriate their investments, subject to compliance with certain regulations. FPIs can repatriate the sale proceeds of their investments, dividends, and interest income. FEMA also allows FPIs to open and maintain a non-resident rupee account, NRE, and a non-resident ordinary account, NRO, with Indian banks. SEBI regulations on FPIs. The Securities and Exchange Board of India, SEBI, is the regulatory body responsible for regulating FPIs in India. SEBI has issued several guidelines and circulars to regulate FPIs in India. SEBI regulations on FPIs are in line with FEMA guidelines. Under SEBI regulations, FPIs are classified into two categories, namely, foreign portfolio investors, FPIs, and eligible foreign investors, EFIs. FPIs are those who have been registered with SEBI under the SEBI Foreign Portfolio Investors Regulations 2019. EFIs are those who invest in India through the International Financial Services Center, IFSC. SEBI has also prescribed the investment limits for FPIs in Indian securities. The investment limits vary depending on the type of security and the category of the FPI. SEBI has also prescribed sectoral caps for FPIs in Indian companies. For instance, FPIs are not allowed to invest more than 24% of the paid-up capital of an Indian company engaged in the defense sector. SEBI regulations also provide for the KYC, Know Your Customer, norms for FPIs. FPIs are required to submit their KYC documents to SEBI and comply with the Anti-Money Laundering (AML) guidelines. SEBI has also prescribed the guidelines for the transfer of securities by FPIs in India. SEBI has also issued circulars to simplify the registration process for FPIs in India. The circulars have reduced the time and cost required for FPI registration. SEBI has also allowed FPIs to invest in unlisted debt securities issued by Indian companies. SEBI regulations also provide for the monitoring of FPI investments in India. SEBI requires FPIs to report their investments and divestments in Indian securities on a daily basis. SEBI also monitors the concentration of FPI investments in Indian companies to ensure that no single FPI holds a significant stake in an Indian company. Qualified Foreign Investors, QFIs. Apart from FPIs, SEBI also allows qualified foreign investors, QFIs, to invest in Indian securities. QFIs are individuals and entities who are not resident in India but are eligible to invest in Indian securities. QFIs were introduced in 2011 to widen the investor base for Indian securities. Under SEBI regulations, QFIs can invest in Indian mutual funds and directly invest in Indian equities. QFIs are required to open a demat account with a SEBI registered depository participant (DP) to invest in Indian securities. QFIs are also required to comply with the KYC norms prescribed by SEBI. SEBI has prescribed the investment limits for QFIs in Indian securities. The investment limits vary depending on the type of security and the category of the QFI. SEBI has also prescribed the guidelines for the transfer of securities by QFIs in India. SEBI has also allowed QFIs to invest in Indian debt securities. QFIs can invest in Indian debt securities issued by Indian companies and government securities. The investment limits for QFIs in Indian debt securities are also prescribed by SEBI. Taxation of foreign portfolio investments in India. One of the major challenges faced by foreign portfolio investors, FPIs, in India is the complex tax regime. FPIs are subject to different tax rates depending on the type of security and the category of the FPI. For instance, FPIs are subject to a higher tax rate on short-term capital gains than on long-term capital gains. The Government of India has taken steps to simplify the tax regime for FPIs in India, but more needs to be done to make it more investor-friendly. Recent developments in FPI regulations. The SEBI has been making continuous efforts to simplify and streamline the FPI regulations in India. In 2021, SEBI introduced several amendments to the FPI regulations to provide more flexibility to FPIs. For instance, SEBI allowed FPIs to participate in the offer for sale (OFS) mechanism and permitted them to invest in unlisted debt securities issued by Indian companies. Impact of FPI investments on Indian markets. Foreign portfolio investments have played a significant role in the growth of Indian markets. FPIs have invested heavily in Indian equities and debt securities, providing much-needed capital to Indian companies. However, FPI investments can also create volatility in the markets, as FPIs tend to pull out their investments in times of uncertainty. The Indian government and regulatory authorities need to ensure that the FPI regulations are stable and predictable to provide a conducive environment for foreign capital.